Imagine a ship found in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, sailing slowly, with its sails partially raised, its cargo intact, personal belongings organized, and the table still set for the next meal. There were no signs of a struggle, no serious structural damage, no bodies. The only detail impossible to ignore was the most disturbing of all. No one was on board. The ship had simply lost its entire crew, as if everyone had disappeared at the same time, leaving behind absolute silence and a mystery that would span centuries. This ship was called the Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, the British freighter Dei Grazia was crossing the Atlantic waters when its crew spotted something strange on the horizon. A ship seemed to be sailing aimlessly, with irregular movements, as if adrift, but still obeying the currents and the wind. Captain David Morehouse observed attentively and soon recognized the vessel. It was the Mary Celeste, a ship he knew well, including the captain who commanded it. As they approached, the sailors realized that there was no one on deck. No response came to the calls. A small group decided to embark to investigate. What they found would defy all maritime logic known until then. The Mary Celeste was in surprisingly good condition. The hull showed no serious cracks. The sails were partially hoisted. The cargo of barrels of industrial alcohol was practically intact. The navigation instruments were in place. The crew's clothes remained folded. The logbook was there, with the last entry made days before, without any sign of emergency. The captain of the Mary Celeste was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, an experienced, respected man known for his rigorous discipline. He had decided to take his wife Sarah and his young daughter Sophia with him on that voyage. 7 experienced sailors were also on board. There was no indication that Briggs was reckless or someone who made risky decisions without a clear reason. On the contrary, everything in his career indicated caution and responsibility. The ship had departed from New York bound for Genoa, Italy. The crossing should have been long, but absolutely common by the standards of the time. The last entry in the log indicated that everything was proceeding normally. No severe storms had been recorded in the region during that period. No pirate attacks were reported. No nearby vessel witnessed any distress call. The most intriguing detail was the lifeboat. It was not on the ship. The lifeboat had been removed in an orderly fashion, not hastily ripped away. This indicated that the crew left the Mary Celeste voluntarily. But why would anyone abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship in the open sea, carrying a small child, without clear signs of immediate danger? When the news spread, the case became an obsession for investigators, sailors, and journalists. The more the Mary Celeste was analyzed, the stranger everything seemed. No simple explanation could answer the central question that echoes to this day: what made an entire crew disappear without a trace? This was just the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. An enigma that has spanned generations, fueled theories, inspired books, debates, and investigations that have never reached a definitive conclusion. To understand the mystery of the Mary Celeste, it's necessary to go back a few months before the disappearance and observe who was the man in charge of the ship. Benjamin Spooner Briggs was no ordinary captain. He came from a traditional family of sailors, had an impeccable reputation, and was known for his faith, discipline, and extreme care for his crew. Briggs was the type who avoided unnecessary risks and followed protocols with absolute rigor. Nothing in his history indicated that he would make an impulsive or dangerous decision without a very well-founded reason. When Briggs accepted command of the Mary Celeste, he saw in that voyage a tranquil opportunity. The ship had undergone recent renovations and was in excellent condition. The cargo consisted mainly of industrial alcohol, stored in well-sealed barrels, something common for the time. It was not an explosive cargo, nor illegal, nor especially valuable enough to attract criminals. Everything indicated that it would be just another routine crossing of the Atlantic. The presence of his wife Sarah and little Sophia further reinforces the mysterious nature of the case. Briggs was a devoted and extremely protective father. Taking the family to sea was not uncommon at that time, but it was only done when the captain fully trusted in the safety of the voyage. This makes the idea of a hasty abandonment even harder to accept. A man like that wouldn't put his wife and daughter in a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean without a real and immediate threat. The last entry in the Mary Celeste's logbook was made on November 25, 1872, approximately 10 days before the ship was found. The entry indicated a position near the Azores and did not mention any abnormal situation. There were no reports of severe storms, structural problems, or conflicts on board. After that, the logbook simply ends, as if time had stopped at that point. When the ship was examined in more detail, some details caught the investigators' attention. There was accumulated water in the hold, but an insufficient quantity to justify panic. The bilge pump was partially disassembled, which could indicate that Briggs believed there was a bigger problem than actually existed. Still, nothing suggested an imminent sinking. Another curious point was the state of the cabin table. Some accounts indicate that there were signs of a meal in progress, as if the crew had been suddenly interrupted. There was no mess, nor signs of violence. Everything seemed too organized for a chaotic emergency scenario. The navigation instruments were practically intact, except for a possibly missing sextant. This detail is important because the sextant would be essential if someone tried to navigate in a lifeboat. This reinforces the hypothesis that the crew left the ship believing they would return soon or that they needed to maintain some kind of orientation at sea. As the Mary Celeste was towed to Gibraltar for formal investigation, the questions only increased. How could such a well-preserved ship be completely abandoned? What would have led an experienced captain to make such an extreme decision? And, above all, why was no one ever found? These doubts marked the beginning of an investigation that, even after so many years, remains shrouded in uncertainty and contradictory theories. When the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar, maritime authorities began a thorough investigation. The objective was simple in theory, but complex in practice, to understand why a perfectly seaworthy ship had been abandoned in the middle of the ocean. From the outset, investigators realized that this was no ordinary case. There were no bodies, no clear signs of a struggle, and no obvious reason for the abandonment. One of the first points analyzed was the cargo. Of the more than 1,000 barrels of industrial alcohol being transported, only 9 were empty. This raised suspicions, but did not indicate theft or large-scale leakage. Still, alcohol was highly volatile, and some experts at the time suggested that vapors might have accumulated in the hold. A low-intensity explosion, enough to frighten but not damage the ship, could have led the captain to order a temporary evacuation. This hypothesis gained strength when considering the personality of Benjamin Briggs. Being a cautious man, he could have decided to evacuate everyone from the ship as a precaution, hoping the situation would stabilize before returning. However, a new question then arises. If the intention was to return, why take everyone, including his wife and young daughter, to a fragile boat in the open sea? Another theory investigated was that of a possible natural phenomenon. Some believed that a waterspout or a sudden change in the weather could have caused panic. However, meteorological records did not indicate severe storms in that region and at that time. The state of the ship also did not match the passage of an extreme weather event. The hypothesis of a pirate attack was considered, but quickly weakened. Pirates usually looted valuable cargo and left clear signs of violence. On the Mary Celeste, nothing was taken except the lifeboat. Personal belongings, money, and valuables remained intact. This made any external criminal action unlikely. Some investigators suggested internal conflict. Perhaps an argument between crew members, or even a mutiny. But again, there were no physical signs to support this idea. No weapons were missing, there were no bloodstains, and the relationship between captain and crew seemed stable before departure. Furthermore, a mutiny would hardly result in the complete abandonment of the ship without taking adequate supplies. As the days passed, the investigation began to enter speculative territory. Small details were amplified: the stopped clock, the ship's exact position, the fact that the sails were partially adjusted. Each element was repeatedly analyzed, but none fit perfectly into a definitive explanation. Meanwhile, newspapers of the time began to publish exaggerated versions of the story. Headlines spoke of curses, supernatural disappearances, and invisible forces of the sea. Although these narratives attracted public attention, they further hindered a rational analysis of what had happened. In the end, the authorities in Gibraltar were unable to reach an official conclusion. Captain Morehouse, who found the ship, was even suspected of fraud, but no concrete evidence was found. The Mary Celeste was released, sailed again for a time, but its reputation was forever tarnished. And so, the mystery grew. An intact ship, a missing crew, and no definitive answer. The more they investigated, the more the case seemed to escape the grasp of logic. Over the years, the case of the Mary Celeste began to transcend the boundaries of maritime investigation and definitively entered the realm of popular imagination. Writers, journalists, and scholars revisited the story, each attempting to fill in the gaps left by the official investigation. The ghost ship came to be seen not only as a nautical mystery but as a symbol of the unknown that the sea still holds today. One of the most discussed theories in the following decades involved structural flaws in the ship itself. Some experts suggested that the Mary Celeste might have been slowly taking on water, something almost imperceptible at first, but enough to worry the captain. If Briggs believed the ship was doomed to sink, the decision to abandon ship might have been made in desperation, even if it later proved unnecessary. Another point frequently analyzed was the state of the bilge pump. Reports indicate that it may not have been functioning correctly. This would have given the captain the impression that the water level was rising uncontrollably. On a ship laden with highly flammable alcohol, any malfunction could be seen as an immediate threat to the lives of everyone on board. There is also the theory that the captain tied the lifeboat to the ship, planning to drift only for a short period. If something went wrong, such as the rope breaking or a sudden change in wind, the lifeboat could have drifted away quickly, leaving the crew with no chance of returning. This hypothesis is one of the most accepted by modern historians, precisely because it explains the abandonment without resorting to extreme or supernatural events. Despite this, no concrete evidence has been found to confirm this scenario. There were no clear records of the length of the rope used, nor witnesses who could recount the procedure. Everything remained in the realm of supposition, based only on the logical behavior of an experienced captain in a risky situation. While scholars sought technical answers, the public was captivated by more mysterious versions. Fiction books began to portray the Mary Celeste as a cursed ship. Stories spoke of voices in the sea, apparitions, and even interventions by unknown forces. These narratives, though fictional, helped to immortalize the event in popular culture. Interestingly, many of these versions ended up being confused with real facts over time. Invented details began to be repeated as if they were part of the original investigation, making it even more difficult to separate truth from imagination. The mystery grew ever larger, fueled not only by what was known, but mainly by what was never discovered. Even today, more than a century later, the case of the Mary Celeste continues to be studied. New analyses, based on modern technology and the review of old documents, still occasionally emerge. However, none of them have managed to offer a definitive and universally accepted answer. The sea moved on, the ship disappeared with time, but the story remained alive, like a silent echo of a moment when people simply vanished, leaving behind only questions. As time progressed, the mystery of the Mary Celeste began to be analyzed from a new historical perspective. Researchers began to study not only the ship itself, but also the context of the time in which the disappearance occurred. Navigation in the 19th century was extremely risky, and decisions made on the high seas often needed to be quick and based on limited information. Captain Benjamin Briggs was known as a cautious and experienced man. He came from a family connected to the sea and had a solid reputation among other commanders. Precisely for this reason, many scholars believe that his decision to abandon ship was not impulsive, but the result of a sequence of events that he interpreted as a serious threat to the lives of his family and crew. One detail that gained prominence was the cargo carried by the Mary Celeste. The ship carried barrels of industrial alcohol, a volatile substance. Some of these barrels were found empty, although without visible signs of leakage. This led to the hypothesis that alcohol vapors may have accumulated in the hold, creating the risk of an explosion. Even without fire or apparent damage, the mere smell or suspicion of flammable gases could have led the captain to order an immediate abandonment. Modern studies suggest that small internal explosions, caused by the release of vapors, could have occurred without leaving significant structural marks. Such an event would have been enough to frighten the crew, reinforcing the idea that the ship was no longer safe. Still, this theory doesn't fully explain why everyone would leave the vessel without taking adequate supplies for a long voyage in a lifeboat. Another intriguing element is the weather. Meteorological records indicate that the region faced unstable conditions in the days leading up to the ship's rescue. Strong winds and rough seas could have aggravated any technical problems, making the situation even more tense. In such a scenario, wrong decisions could be made even by experienced sailors. Over the decades, the Mary Celeste has become a classic case study of how fear and uncertainty influence human behavior. It's not just an abandoned ship, but a portrait of how ordinary people react to the unknown, especially when isolated in the middle of the ocean. The absence of bodies, signs of struggle, or farewell messages remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the story. Everything indicates that the crew believed this was a temporary situation, something from which they could recover quickly. This belief makes the outcome even more tragic, as it suggests that the disappearance occurred silently, without fanfare. Thus, the Mary Celeste remains a reminder that the sea holds mysteries that may never be fully clarified. Each new theory adds layers to the story, but none can completely erase it. With the advancement of studies and the continued interest in the case, new theories began to emerge throughout the 20th century. Some of them sought simpler and more human explanations, moving away from sensationalist ideas and trying to reconstruct step by step what may have happened after the abandonment of the Mary Celeste. One of these hypotheses suggests that Captain Briggs believed the ship was dangerously adrift and that the lifeboat would only be used as temporary support, tied by a rope. According to this line of thought, the crew could have tied the lifeboat to the ship, maintaining a certain distance while waiting for the danger to pass. However, a sudden change in weather or a mooring failure could have separated the lifeboat from the Mary Celeste, leaving everyone at the mercy of the open ocean. This theory is considered plausible by many historians, as it explains why the ship was left in relatively organized conditions. Another important point is the navigation of the time. Instruments such as compasses and chronometers were essential, but not infallible. Any miscalculation could lead the captain to believe he was closer to the coast than he actually was. This false sense of security could have influenced the decision to abandon ship, believing that rescue would be quick. There are also records indicating that the Mary Celeste's bilge pump may not have been functioning correctly. If the captain had the impression that the ship was taking on water uncontrollably, even if this wasn't entirely true, the situation would have been alarming enough to justify an evacuation. The problem is that, when the ship was found, there was no excessive water in the hold, raising the possibility of a misjudgment. Over the years, writers and journalists have contributed to increasing the mystery. Exaggerated accounts and invented details have been incorporated into the popular narrative, distorting the original facts. This has given the case almost supernatural overtones, although the most serious investigations point to a succession of human decisions made under pressure. Even so, the silence left by the crew remains difficult to ignore. No detailed entry in the logbook clearly explains the reason for the abandonment. The last recorded entry did not indicate immediate panic, only an apparently normal voyage. This contrast between the tranquil record and the mysterious outcome keeps the case alive in the collective imagination. The Mary Celeste ended up becoming a symbol of the uncertainties of life at sea. A seemingly intact ship, sailing aimlessly, carrying with it the absence of its occupants. This image has spanned generations and continues to be remembered as one of the greatest enigmas in maritime history. Over time, the case of the Mary Celeste began to profoundly influence popular culture and the way people viewed the sea. The ship began to be cited in books, newspapers, and academic debates as a classic example of an unsolved mystery. For many sailors, the story served as a warning about the invisible dangers of navigation, those that do not appear on nautical charts nor can be accurately predicted. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, reports emerged of other ships found in strange circumstances, often compared to the Mary Celeste. However, none of them presented the same level of strangeness. In almost all cases, there were clear signs of shipwreck, severe storms, or violent conflicts. The Mary Celeste remained unique precisely because it did not present any of these concrete evidences. Some researchers began to analyze the psychological behavior of captains and crews in extreme situations. Modern studies suggest that prolonged isolation, coupled with constant fear of the unknown, can lead to hasty decisions. Captain Briggs was known as an experienced and cautious man, but even the most prepared can err when confronted with a poorly understood threat. Another line of investigation focused on the state of the industrial alcohol transported by the ship. The released vapors could cause headaches, dizziness, and even mild hallucinations. Although there is no definitive proof that this occurred, the possibility reinforces the idea that the crew may have believed they were in imminent danger, even without visible signs of destruction. With the advancement of maritime technology, modern experts have revisited the case using simulations and meteorological analyses from that time. These studies indicate that unstable sea conditions could have changed rapidly, creating a confusing situation for those on board. Even so, no simulation has been able to explain with complete accuracy the complete disappearance of all the people. The fascination with the Mary Celeste also stems from the fact that it challenges the human need for clear answers. The ship was found sailing calmly, as if waiting for its occupants to return. This powerful image fuels theories and debates to this day, keeping the case alive even after more than a century. In the end, the Mary Celeste left a legacy of unanswered questions. It represents the boundary between what can be explained by logic and what remains shrouded in mystery. Each new generation revisits the case with new tools and perspectives, but the ship's silence remains intact. The story of the Mary Celeste didn't reach definitive conclusions, but it solidified the ship as one of the greatest enigmas ever recorded at sea. After being towed and undergoing formal investigations, the case was eventually closed without a satisfactory official explanation. Authorities at the time raised suspicions of fraud and intentional abandonment, but no concrete evidence was found to support these accusations. Over time, the Mary Celeste sailed again under new owners, carrying with it the reputation of a cursed ship. This reputation hampered its commercial operation, as many sailors refused to work aboard. Years later, the ship deliberately ran aground on a reef, ending its journey discreetly, but leaving behind a story that would continue to live on long after its physical existence. What makes this case so enduring is the fact that it seems simple at first glance, but becomes increasingly complex the more it is analyzed. There were no clear signs of violence, nor definitive proof of a natural disaster. Everything indicates that the crew left the ship voluntarily, believing they were making the safest choice. The problem is that this choice led to everyone's complete disappearance. Modern historians agree that the most likely explanation is a combination of factors: fear of an explosion, instrument failure, unstable weather conditions, and decisions made under extreme pressure. None of these elements alone explains the mystery, but together they form a plausible scenario for the ship's sudden abandonment. Even so, the Mary Celeste continues to fascinate because it represents something greater than a simple maritime accident. It symbolizes the unknown, human decisions in the face of danger, and the limits of historical investigation. It is not always possible to reconstruct the past with complete clarity, especially when the main witnesses have disappeared without a trace. To this day, the name Mary Celeste is cited as synonymous with mystery. Its case is studied in schools, debated by experts, and recounted in documentaries around the world. Each new analysis attempts to fill the gaps left by history, but none manages to completely eliminate the enigma. Thus, the Mary Celeste remains sailing in the collective memory of humanity. A silent ship, found adrift, reminds us that the sea holds deep secrets and that some stories will never have a definitive ending. If you've made it this far, it's because this mystery has truly captivated you. Stories like Mary Celeste show that the real world can be just as intriguing as any fiction. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next real and mysterious stories we're bringing you here. Liking the video also greatly helps the channel continue to grow and bring this content to more people. Now I want to hear from you. Is there a real story, a mystery, or a curious case you'd like to see told here on the channel? Write it in the comments. Your suggestion could be the next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and we'll see you in the next story.